And we're live. Welcome everyone to a webinar that is a little bit different from the one we usually do. But we've been having discussion with Ross since, I guess, forever on this topic. And since you've wrote a new book, and today Ross can talk all about it, we wanted to bring a panel together of entrepreneur, multi-entrepreneur from US, UK, and kind of discuss about the challenge that new first-time founder and second-time founder have advantage and disadvantage on two sides of the pond. But without further ado, let me introduce the panel and a little bit of your background, and then we can crack on the question. So let's start with Ross, the star of the show. Welcome to the show, Ross.
Super happy to be here. I would definitely challenge the fact that I am a star of the show, given the panel and all the other awesome people. But I appreciate your kindness. It did cost me a lot. I paid for it.
Good. And a little bit of your background.
Yes, so I'm a head of product. Yes, so I'm a head of product at Lima Charlie. I have been in the space as an operator for quite some time, primarily focused on product, go-to-market, partnership, sales, and so on and so forth. I have a fairly active blog about the cybersecurity industry called Venture in Security. And as you mentioned, I recently published a book called Cyber for Builders about building cybersecurity startups.
Brilliant. Thank you for coming on the show. We're going to discuss all about it because it's one of my recent favorite books. Lorna, the star of the UK.
Well, again, I'm not so sure about that. But hi, everyone. I'm Lorna Armitage. I'm one of the co-founders of Caps Lock. So we reskill adults into careers in cybersecurity, generally career changers who are looking to get into the sector. My background really is I've got a background in both cybersecurity and education. So I've worked in cyber for many years, well over 15 years, well before it was called cybersecurity anyway, before that was even a thing. And in education as well.
Cool.
Yes, before it was cool. Absolutely, Francesco, absolutely. And yeah, I worked as a senior academic for a number of years as well, developing undergrad and postgraduate courses. That's me.
Brilliant. Alistair, the star of the two ponds.
Too kind. So Alistair Patterson, I'm currently CEO of Harmonic Security, which is a new company based in the US this time around. So I'm based in San Francisco. I've been here 9 years. But prior to that, I was CEO at Digital Shadows, which was a UK-started cybersecurity company that some of you will know. We were acquired in 2022. So yeah, I always think it's last year, but it's actually more than a year ago now. Seems pretty recent. So I've had a bit of experience building companies, both starting in the UK and starting in the US this time around. Prior to Digital Shadows, I was at Detica, which some of you will know. The Detica Mafia has started Garrison, Panacea, Quantexa, Digital Shadows, and a bunch of others as well. So all good friends of mine.
Brilliant. And Saj, the star of the stars, the man behind all of the recent startup here in the UK. Tell us a little bit more about you and Plexa.
Super kind, thank you. Hi guys, I'm Saj, Chief Commercial Officer, Head of Innovation at a company called Plexa. So over the last 6 years, we've delivered lots of work at the intersection of public-private sectors in this space, typically focused on growing the UK cyber ecosystem, building partnerships across the international cybersecurity landscape, and predominantly working with lots of cybersecurity companies, helping them develop and grow both in the UK and abroad.
Thank you, Sash. And myself, Francesco, or Frank for Friend, as is becoming now a theme to joke about. I'm the CEO and founder of Phoenix Security. I'm a practitioner turned startup founder, hence why the book of Ross really clicked with me. And I wish I had it when I started, really. And I've heard at least 2 or 3 people saying the same things. But maybe let's start on a more general perspective. And I want to go around perspective-wise. What do you think the state of the current cybersecurity funding is across UK and US? And what are the main differences? I want to hear all of you. Maybe let's start backwards. Saj, you've been involved on this side of the pond a lot. You recently brought some of the startup at RSA, I think last year. So what is your perspective of the current state of the funding of cyber?
Yeah, so I think the pipeline for entrepreneurship in this space is pretty strong. A lot of particularly obviously speaking to the UK side of things at the moment, the ecosystem has definitely matured quite substantially over the last 6-7 years. So the UK cybersecurity market has doubled in size in that time. It's worth just over £10 billion today. And in terms of the number of businesses in the UK, we're looking at between 1,750 and 1,800. So it's still, obviously comparatively to the US, which is a different order of magnitude. It's substantially smaller, but in terms of a domestic market, it's pretty healthy. And then specifically from the work we do, we deliver a program called Cyber Runway. It's the UK's largest cybersecurity accelerator. In the last 3 years, we've worked with 224 companies through that program. And we've seen quite a strong pipeline actually coming through at the early stage, so the pre-seed, seed stage. Obviously, there are some challenges beyond that, typically from bridging between early stages of venture in the space and the growth stage, but I'm sure we'll touch on that in this discussion. But in terms of the early stage pipeline, pretty strong, I would say.
Brilliant. And Al, you've seen early days of raising capital as a first-time founder, and then more recently raising successfully capital in the US as a second-time founder. Maybe you've seen probably the evolution of this from a founder perspective. What is your thought? What has changed? What has stayed the same? And let's start with that. It's already a loaded question.
Yeah, quite a big topic there. Yeah, I mean, I think when we were getting going with Digital Shadows, it was all the way back in 2011, and we did a seed round in 2013 in the UK, and then we did Series A in 2015 in the US. And I would say that, there's some pretty big differences between then and now. But I'd still say that I think the UK actually at seed stage is pretty interesting. There's some great government incentives like SEIS, EIS, which you don't get in the US. And there's certainly a lot of initiatives, there's things like Innovate UK and so on that we don't really have stateside. So that said, of course, there is the culture of entrepreneurialism in the Bay Area is just something that's just not matched anywhere else, and it's the kind of the influence of the repeat founders here that I think is incredibly valuable. And if we're talking just from a funding perspective, so yeah, the repeat founders becoming angel investors, I think is a huge benefit for startups. We're just starting to get some of that in the UK now because there's a few of us that have been through the mill, but it takes time, right? That doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that someone can snap their fingers and fix. I think the big thing that the US has got is the growth stage capital that it just has in spades in a way that the UK just doesn't. But the biggest change that I've seen, just talking about that briefly, and then I'll pause, is that I think the US VCs have woken up to the fact that there is a lot of talent in the UK. So you've seen that when I 2015, when I was trying to raise Series A, there weren't any cyber specialist operators really in the UK at all, and there were very few venture funds from the US, right? You had Excel, Index, and a handful of others, and then otherwise it was UK operators. But now you've got the likes of 1011 who've invested in me this time and last time, Paladin who invested in me last time. These US-based cybersecurity specialists that are setting up offices in London and backing founders there. So very cool to see that. I think certainly it's improving, but different scale to what's happening in the US still, clearly.
Brilliant. And Lorna, from your perspective as a first-time founder, what was your thoughts on raising as a academic back into the commercial world?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting process when we first started it, and we went through it in COVID, right? So the landscape again was very strange for everybody involved. Sorry, there's a cat just jumping in. He loves the camera. So yeah, and we had some of the difficulties we had was we had investment lined up, and then second lockdown hit. And so investors were pulling out. Nobody knew what the landscape was going to be. But I think we were very fortunate. We got some really good social impact investors. And for us, our cap table, what we have is, and going back to Alistair's point, the EIS and and the schemes in the UK really do promote that angel investment. So we managed to get some really good angel investment as well there to help us. I think the landscape at the minute, from what we've seen and conversations we've had, it seemed to slow a little bit last year. But judging by the inbox and the messages that we're getting now, it's ramping up this year, and people are really starting to look and go, okay, well, maybe we didn't spend as much last year, so this year is the year we're going to start ramping this back up. And I think in terms of the UK, US, now we haven't got US investment, but we've had conversations. I don't know whether, and it'd be interesting to hear the rest of the panel's view on this, whether sometimes you can slip between that gap of you're either asking for too much, so you've got a group here that are just not gonna get involved, or you're asking for too little, and this tends to be more the US, so the investors in the US are interested in getting involved because it's just not, you're not asking for enough money on that. So I think we do sometimes slip between the gap on a couple of those as well. Now we're in a fortunate position at the minute that we don't need to raise, but it doesn't mean we're not always looking and looking for opportunities.
Brilliant. And I definitely want to touch on that. But Ross, your perspective, being involved in syndicate, being involved in VC on different level of advisory or friendship, what is your view right now on cybersecurity funding, and how did, from this discussion, the landscape change from your view of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely second everything that was said by previous panelists, and frankly, I'm less familiar with the reality on the ground in the UK. All I am getting is the perspectives of people like yourself and other founders, so it's a bit of a secondhand knowledge and the secondhand understanding of the market. But on the high level, what I have seen is that the pandemic in general has changed the investment landscape globally. Before, founders had to be in a certain place to go and pitch in person, like set up those meetings, show up, like drive for an hour and a half, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, if you're joining via Zoom, it kind of doesn't matter if you're joining from the US, if you're joining from the UK, if you're joining from the Bay Area or somewhere else. What really matters is the ambition. What matters is the idea. What matters is the caliber of the team. And I think what the pandemic has highlighted is that there is good talent globally, and VCs are now much more open to investing. That said, I think the challenge is that as the first time founder, you still have to go and look at your local networks, and you still have to start where your stronger relationships are, where you can get those warm introductions, where you can get somebody to vouch for you, and that is typically your local networks, unless you have worked abroad and you have worked on the global scale, in which case you may be lucky that way. But because you have to start locally, you naturally have to go to local investors first, regardless of the size of your ambition. So again, from my perspective, it's hard for me to compare the before and now, specifically in the UK, but on the global scale, I think that as a rule, it now has become much easier to get that initial conversation with the investors in the US, regardless where you're located. But I think that the scale of the ambition and the scale of the opportunity still has to match the US sort of metrics and the US parameters for the American VCs to invest.
No, I do totally agree on that. I think there is a different level of scale and a different level of ambition. And if you're not pointing and pitching, and the price of the round is actually reflecting that. But there is also a challenge of, if you raise locally and if you stay too much locally, and we can touch that on the panel, then you get kind of rooted in that ambition to actually go outside your comfort country is there. But I've seen as well that even Angel Network and Angel VC, of course, is a proxy trust, but they've been opening up to a more international investment, while before they used to be, I just put money where the money is, for tax incentive, for different things. But we've seen more, at least in my experience in the last 3-4 years, I've seen wider approach, even from a family office angel investments. Do you see as well that, Ross, in the US, do you see a lot of presence of family office or angel investment, or is mostly VC?
I mean, it depends. Like particularly a lot of the angel networks, they're kind of invisible unless you know where to look for, and that's the tricky part about angels. So if you are in the Bay Area, if you are in New York, the kind of connections you will be able to access are very different than if you are somewhere in Kentucky. So that is different. I think on the family offices side, like I have personally not seen a lot of attention there. There was this brief period of time during this like venture boom where everybody, including family offices, started to look at cybersecurity. That said, most family offices are finding it smarter to become LPs in VC funds than it is to invest directly, simply because they don't have the expertise when it comes to evaluating companies, doing the due diligence, and allocating capital directly into companies. They could co-invest with the funds in which they're already LPs, but I personally haven't seen like a large number of family offices sort of running to start investing directly. On the angel network side, I mean, I'll mention, and he knows it firsthand, and he knows it much better than I do, that it comes down to your local network, and there are pockets, there are ecosystems on the planet where people congregate, and the power of network, it sort of multiplies because of that congregation. So you have the Bay Area, you have Tel Aviv, and in Israel, you have New York to a certain degree, probably to a lesser degree. But you need to have this. You need to have a pipeline of repeat founders. You need to have a pipeline of people who have made money and who are open to investing this money and putting them into high risk portfolio companies.
I do agree, but also I want to touch maybe on that, the power, as Lorna was saying, and I want to explore that more, the power of angel investment, because it's not just money, it's smart money. And I think when you start, especially if you don't have that strong network, you need that outreach or proxy trust, as I used to call it, from the founder. So Lorna, from your perspective, as you had the chance well, I don't want to say luck, but how would you say the perfect word would be the trust of a specific individual to invest in you? How have you found it to be instrumental or a must-have for a cybersecurity startup to get those introductions?
Yeah, I think it can be really beneficial, and you spot on what you say, really, Francesco. It's not always just the money, right? We need the money to start, right? That's why we go out for investment. But sometimes it's the experience, it's the network of those people. You know, if you're getting the right angel investing, they can open up conversations for you that you wouldn't be able to get yourself. So for us, it's been invaluable. You know, we've got some fantastic angel investors who are a fantastic sounding board for us, who have got a great, I don't know whether I should say it this way, but a great little black book, you know, that you can then access. So I think it's more than the money when you look.
I think we lost Lorna.
We've been losing people. We've been shedding people.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is a DDoS on Facebook.
Nobody wants to talk to you, Francesco. That's what's happening.
Oh, too many people want to talk to me.
I've had enough.
Our friend is a DDoS. Al, your perspective.
Sorry, I got beated just there. This was about angels specifically in the value, right?
Yes. How instrumental has been angels?
Yeah, huge actually. I mean, I was very fortunate, again, just through kind of networking and determination to get hold of a bunch of very smart, excellent people last time around to come in as my angels from the US, because I was starting in the UK. I didn't know anyone over here, and I made a few trips and managed to break into a sort of couple of networks there. So those individuals were really helpful last time, because you think about building a business, like what matters. I mean, obviously there's building the product, which I think you can figure out as a founder, or you should be able to. That's kind of your job. But the bits that are a little harder from that you can't just solve by thinking about them, the fundraising piece and then the hiring piece, I think are critical, and the angels are so helpful for both of those, right? They bring credibility to fundraising and introductions, which you desperately need, particularly if you're coming from somewhere outside of the network of these VCs. The VCs only really accept trusted intros, as we all know. So that's one big thing. And then, I think the other thing is on the hiring. I got a bunch of excellent people out of my VCs and my angels, but the angels in particular can help you diligence people as well. Although it's a big community now, cybersecurity, it's also still quite a small world, and there's usually a few touch points you need to get to anybody one way or another. So yeah, those things were hugely important. And so this time around, I've got a large number of angel investors involved, including a number of the CISOs. Something I'd say that we sort of didn't note before, but I think there's almost like a cool club of the CISOs that the others listen to, right? And a lot of them, of course, are in the Bay Area and in the US, and the Europe's got some of those as well. But they're kind of the influencers of the security scene. And I think it is, if you're building out a new company and you're trying to take over a category or be that breakthrough thing, it is important that you're plugged into that network, right? That they know about you, they can talk about you, and there's almost like they get a bit of cachet almost from the fact that they're associated with this new breakthrough cool company that they can tell their friends about, and so there is, I think, a bit of an art to that, and it's pretty difficult to do that if you're just sat in UK. And one of the things that we did last time was manage to kind of break into that circle a little bit over time. But I think it does depend on the type of company you're trying to build as well. I don't think that every company should be trying to come to the US and be some giant, venture-backed firm that, and I don't mean that in a positive or negative way. I just think different types of businesses are better suited to different types of, opportunity and goal. So it really depends what you're trying to do, I think, with a business as to what the right way to approach it is.
On that point, Alistair, have you found that CISO being angel and then buyout? I've seen kind of both aspects of the coin, where people shy out on buying from companies that they invest, unless they're in a syndicate or they're really keen to actually support the company. I've seen the completely two opposite side of aspect of the discussion. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, I think in some ways, if you've got a CISO who's an investor, it can make it more difficult for them to buy you than if not. And I'm not advising that in general as a strategy to try to gain a lot of sales, because that's not a great way to go about it for those reasons. Of course, they're going to come under more scrutiny and all those things. But I think it's almost the value in that, in being part of the communities that those types of people operate in is the key. Again, I think it comes down to what you're trying to do with the business. I think if you want to build a global, we've talked about Israel before. I know Frank is a great model for this. But if you're trying to build a company that comes from one country into the US and tries to build out a industry leading firm, I mean, you can't really do that without being in the US. And so anything that's going to help smooth that passage over and get you in the right networks over here is a good thing, no doubt.
Brilliant. And Saj, from your perspective, how have you seen instrument or non-instruments of Plexar as an accelerator to support and create their network, especially for people that don't necessarily come from a super high network or had network of networked individuals? And how have you helped as well? I know it firsthand from my end, but have you helped with Plexar other?
Well, obviously, I'd say very instrumental, but I'm joking. No, I mean, we've been really fortunate to be working in this space, like I said, for the last 6 years, and really kind of what we've set out to do is try and just close the gap between those who are looking to build companies in the space and perhaps like some of those networks that are hard to access, the expertise that is difficult to avail of, particularly if you're a first-time founder in this space. That tends to be the core population that we work with, so people who have not done this before. And so what we tend to do is try and help bring forward some of the market needs that sit, some of the challenges that the security community are facing, and share that with the entrepreneurial ecosystem as well, such that there's greater proximity between those developing solutions and those who have a need to consume those solutions. I mean, I completely agree with some of the points that Alistair just made around the need to be on the ground in certain places, particularly obviously in the US, as noted. But I think that's also true for the UK. There's the funny thing about the UK cybersecurity ecosystem is obviously the UK as a country is not particularly, in terms of England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland is not particularly big, but we actually do have a kind of distributed nature of a lot of the security knowledge and capabilities in this country. So there's typically, key nodes across the UK for different things. Thinking about the Southwest and Cheltenham, obviously from a national security perspective, but then obviously London and other major cities from a commercial perspective and large industry. And over the last few years, a lot of those different nodes in the network have not necessarily been that joined up. Effectively, what we've tried to do over the last few years is create platforms that bring together those different communities in different parts of the UK, such that you can share knowledge insight. But also, for example, if you are a founder who's not necessarily based in a major city like London, you can still access the talent, the opportunity, the investment, the capital that may exist there as well. And then the other side of that is plugging into the international scene. Obviously, this is a massive international market, cybersecurity. And as Al said, you can't just, if you want to build a global business or a category leader, you've got to think international probably from pretty early, at least day one, if not very early in your life cycle. And that often involves building partnerships at a pretty early stage in this space. And we tend to work a lot with UK government in trying to, create infrastructure, landing pads, relationships where we can refer entrepreneurs, particularly across the Atlantic, but also increasingly into other areas of the globe as well, such as the Asia Pacific region. But also we tend to act as a bit of a signposter for capital and investors who are looking to come into the UK market and access talent too. So effectively acting as that kind of orchestrator between those who want to deploy capital, but also those who are looking to raise funding as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Saj. And touching on that, actually, on the kind of view of the world or the longevity of the investment, I think there are certain structural things that require more longer view, and that's where government-backed funds or strong infrastructure-backed fund are helpful. Ross, have you seen that a lot in the US with the born of SPOM and the more position from the US government, more structurally longer-term vision funds backed by government or backed by longer-term vision versus the more short-term 5-10 years vision of the VC?
Well, it is a good question, although I don't know if I will be able to answer it directly, and here is why. I do believe that the government in cybersecurity specifically is a market maker. Like the government so typically the way I have seen it works, there is a large breach, the government reacts, it reacts by creating some compliance requirements and pushing the legislation that forces companies and individuals to start taking their security posture more seriously. And as those requirements come to fruition and get implemented, it creates demand for new market or for new type of solutions, which sort of fuels the demand for new startups and new approaches, new products, and so on and so forth. So from that perspective, I do believe that the role of the government is indeed critical. From the funding standpoint, I would actually love to get the perspective of people who have received the government funding, and like Al, I know you're one of those people, so I will sort of play a role of a host, and I'll kick it to you in a second. But my take on it and what I have seen is that different types of capital create different types of incentives and incentivize different types of behaviors. When you're taking angel funds, you basically have the support, but you also have the capital to take to do the experimentation, develop an MVP, and do the early validation mostly at your pace. Like the time is not running out. Like you have the support, but you're sort of provided with that time where you can do what needs to be done. When you take the venture funding, you're expected to grow fast. And so now you're on this track of like, hey, you have to meet certain milestones at a certain period of time. Again, some people, like, there are pros and cons to it, of course, but the venture capital, it incentivizes you to grow fast, to think about different approaches to go to market, to experiment, to move. The government funding, it incentivizes you to do very different things. In most cases, it incentivizes you to spend time on writing out like long applications, providing like very comprehensive reports. And that's the time that doesn't help you to truly think about building the business or build the business. It's the time that you cannot reuse that time. You cannot repurpose. So now your attention shifts immediately into the government reporting and making sure that you check all the right boxes for job creation and all the other economic factors that you now have to prove, which isn't necessarily helpful in building the company. Like, it doesn't drive the ambition, it doesn't help people to get to market. And so that's where I think that in many ways, and I've seen it in some other countries, such as Canada, for example, in many ways, the government funding, it kind of achieves the opposite to what it's intended to achieve. And instead of driving that ambition and getting like large companies to be created, instead of doing that, it gets people a degree of comfort that sort of prevents them from moving as fast as they could be moving otherwise. And I'm curious if I'm the only one with this take.
No, yeah, I'd love to jump in on that. If I can. So yeah, I think it's kind of three bits. So you were starting to say it's a market maker at the beginning, Ross, which I agree. I mean, what we're doing with Harmonic is trying to help companies adopt generative AI without worrying about their data security and privacy risks. And so the government role in that for me is all about the regulatory environment and thinking through how is that evolving, and are they going to do something sensible with that, and how do I align with that? So there's that bit of government in that engagement. And the second bit is the kind of grants that were made available, things like Innovate UK. And for us, like, that was, I mean, that isn't going to build a company, but it was a sort of, 100K, 200K lifeline as we were getting the company started, which involved a lot of forms and administration. And I totally agree with your point that if there is a bit of a track of kind of government grants, whether it's UK or EU and so on, where you end up building a company that's good at getting grants, but actually not so great at building a product. And the US definitely doesn't really go for that approach. And that isn't a way to build a winner at all. But the thing that the US does have, which I think is kind of the third box here, is In-Q-Tel, which I think is a phenomenal institution. So that is effectively a government-backed VC that is helping smooth the path for really breakthrough cyber and related companies selling into US government, because it's a monster to try to sell into. Yeah. So they're trying to identify strategic technologies that are good for the country, but also potentially able to be used by US government. And so I'm fully behind that. I think it's an excellent initiative and great investor. But yeah, those would be the three buckets I'd think about it in.
Yeah, I mean, our experience. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go on, Lorna.
I was just gonna say, ours was a similar experience to what Al just said there. For us at the beginning, it was a lifesaver. We got an Innovate UK grant. It gave us a little bit of time and headspace to build out the product. But you're right, Ross. I mean, most of the time is taken up with ticking the boxes, doing the documentation. And I think the other thing is as well for a lot of startups. Now, for us in terms of grants, we're familiar with them. Two of the co-founders came from an academic background. We're used to research funding, and doing all of that. So you're familiar with it. But if you're not, and you've never seen that before, on minimal resources, it's very hard to navigate that landscape. And the support is probably equally as hard to navigate, even to just get it. I think there are places now like Plexo that can help support with stuff like that, but that's not their main objective. So they're not going to do these things for you. And I think the other point for the government as well is they're also a customer, right? But again, for a startup, it's very difficult to get into that, which really interested to hear more about, Al, what you just talked about there for the US government, because I think that sounds really promising. And I'd like to see probably something similar in the UK as well there. It'd be really good.
Yeah, just quickly on the grant thing, I completely agree with what all of you guys have said. Where we've seen it best utilised is for that early stage product development and providing that lifeline. So some of our programs, so for example, we're the innovation partner to the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre, and on that we've deployed some non-dilutive funding to support product development for early stage companies. But you do tend to see some companies in the ecosystem who tend to live from grant to grant. and never really grow. And that's where, like, as Ross has said, it can become a distraction from actually going to market properly and trying to build something that services a customer need. On the In-Q-Tel equivalent, so the UK has got the National Security Strategic Investment Fund, which is effectively the UK's In-Q-Tel. It's still relatively new, like I'd say a couple of years old, but we work quite closely with colleagues in that space, and it's really interesting. Actually, we've seen more and more capital being deployed for a fund of funds approach. So they partner with a number of VCs. I think there's 8 partner VCs, and some of the kind of most notable global funds as well. And cyber is one of the key technology areas that they're looking to invest in. So there's been a number of companies in our ecosystem who have availed of that opportunity, which is good, because I think it's really important actually that government, and I was actually saying this to some UK government colleagues earlier, that they become a better customer of early stage innovation in this space, because their buying power potentially could move the market a little bit if they adopt more of some of the novel technologies that are coming through before enterprise. It can act as quite a significant reference customer. There is
Man down.
What isn't it interesting about In-Q-Tel is that they function as a VC firm. They don't function as like a government agency allocating grants.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think in general the government's pretty bad at being a VC. I think In-Q-Tel is sort of the exception. I think where government money's quite well used is where it's put alongside VC, because then you're getting a financial allocator that can make good decisions, and then public money's being.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, just picking up on what Al was saying, I completely agree. And that's the NSIF and In-Q-Tel model, right? The fund of funds approach, where effectively government is an LP in funds which are then deployed on a commercial basis. And then coupled with that, where government does tend to come in with its own money to follow, is to fund work programs where you're looking to adapt a technology which is maybe having been developed for a commercial use case towards a government use case. And that's starting to gain some momentum here in the UK as well.
And I think StreamYard should require some additional level of funding because we keep on losing around them. But I love the cyber resiliency and the fact that where Alistair stops, Sash continue, where Sash stops, Alistair
It looks like I get kicked out.
Seamless.
Alistair, so yeah.
Round robin. Anyway, great panelists that can pick up in this fashion. But on I want to touch as well on the grants, and I found it actually decremental on pushing you to go to market. But from an angel perspective, I don't think it's necessarily it give you enough time. I think there is certain angel that just give you the initial cash injection, but then the growth angels that are really looking at VC or companies that needs to hit specific milestone, especially on the family office side kind of level. But what I found it really useful, and we raised massive amount from angels, it kind of help you pitching to your ideal client and ideal customer. It push you towards that direction. It push you to put the product on the market, but maybe with a little bit of less aggressive milestone than the VC. But is a good path to the VC, prepares you really well from a angel, syndicate, family office. It's a natural graduation process where I found that grant tends to, at the beginning, tends to form your mind, because you need to think about how to pitch the business to the government fundamentally with paper and material. But running through it, it's a lot of paperwork. So I agree with Ross and the rest of the panel, is decremental, but it's a good incentive if you don't have any other option. It's definitely worthwhile to do a try at the beginning, but I wouldn't hammer on that more than one time, especially because paperwork wise and consultancy wise is enormously costly. Ross?
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, the way I think about it is there are many different tools. There are grants, There is angel funding, there are angel syndicates, there are angel syndicates that bring together CISOs, there are syndicates that bring together practitioners, there are syndicates that bring together people who are not even in cybersecurity, which may or may not be your target market, and may or may not, depending on your background and your gaps, you could benefit from getting some help with go-to-market and marketing, and not necessarily security expertise. So there are venture funds that have different fund sizes, and based on that, different return objectives, and based on that, different fund models. So all of those things, they're just tools, and depending on what people are looking to do and what kind of business to build, they may pick the right tools. There's also an opportunity to sort of start by offering services and self-fund, which for some cases, well, for many cases, may not be the right approach, but for some it may. Like, there are some ways for people, depending on the kind of products or services they're building, to be profitable from day one. So to me, I think what one mistake that people often make is they look at the patterns, they look at the things that somebody else mentions. So it's like, oh, angels, VCs, this VC, the other VC, instead of thinking fundamentally, what is the problem I'm trying to solve, and what could be the right solutions for my specific stage, for my specific situation, and for the type of company I'm building.
I totally agree, Ross. Just jumping in on that, I it goes to my point earlier that I think it's fine for some companies that shouldn't even think about coming to the US, right? Because the business is just not a fit. So I think the starting point is, what is it I'm trying to do? And then you figure out the funding sources after that, as you said. Just quickly on your point of building a services business first, that's actually what we did at Digital Shadows, because it was a necessity, right? I couldn't just go and raise a bunch of money. So we bootstrapped for several years, and we had to do the sort of services and consulting model for those couple of years. The great advantage in that approach, by the way, it isn't even, staying alive is one of them. But the big thing was understanding the problem way better. And then we knew actually what to build really well, because we'd lived the problem with our clients for a couple of years before we wrote any software, really. We had minimal software till then. And that's the tough thing in the startup in the early days, is figuring out exactly what to build and how to solve that problem really well to get the fit right. So yeah, services and consulting is actually a great opening for a lot of companies, I think. But obviously you lose time. It depends a little bit how quickly you've got to move. And the big challenge in building the category leader is if you're last to the US and you've got a bunch of competitors here already, it's pretty hard to catch up.
Yeah, I would agree with both those. But counter to that, for us, we had no choice but to go for investment, because our business model, the way we function about removing barriers was, we were using future earnings agreements. So the learners were coming on, but they weren't paying us until they went and got a job. So, we couldn't even start without investment. So there was no choice. And I think it really depends on the business. Nobody wants to be giving away equity, right? But, at times you got to give it away to get moving. So, but it definitely depends. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer here. It is down to the business and their model and what they're wanting to achieve.
One element I want to touch on is as well the typical customer or the end customer that the company try to build. What I've seen more in Europe and less in Israel and less in the US is company trying to solve a problem for SME. I've just seen it more recently as a pattern, while I see it much more frequently in Europe because of maybe some of the business and some of the end buyers are SME, but also because it's easier to kind of build that mixed model of consultancy solution for SME. They are less demanding in terms of customer rather than enterprise. There are as well in Europe less adopter as an enterprise, with exception of few forward-looking CISOs. And definitely for us was the CISO network helped us a lot on building that proxy trust. But maybe let's start with Ross. What do you think of company building solution for SME in terms of frequency in the US versus company trying to solve a supermassive problem for enterprise or kind of large SME to enterprise?
So how do you define an SME in this case? So are we talking about, this isn't a philosophical question, but are you talking about like basically the small businesses or the small and medium enterprises? Because there is the SME versus SMB, and they're often seen differently. So are we talking about like the mid-market enterprises?
I'm talking about the lower ends, so small offices, 10, 15, 20, all the way up to the upper limit of smaller enterprise, and then the smaller enterprise all the way up to enterprises.
I see. Yes, so I do. Well, the reality is that what I have started to see recently also in the US is this attempt to find the market that isn't this red ocean market where you have to go and try to sell to the same CISOs from the same large enterprises. So I don't think that trend is specific to Europe. I think we have as an industry reached the point where there is a saturation on the large enterprise side. And again, it doesn't mean that all the problems have been solved, but what it does mean is that if you're trying to sell to enterprises, you are competing for the attention of the very same 1,500 to 2,500 of CISOs in the country. Because although we like to think of cybersecurity as this like massive, humongous industry, the reality is that buyers of cybersecurity solutions in the US, even with large budgets, or with any budgets that they have to allocate to security, those numbers are not in tens of and hundreds of thousands. They're much smaller. So fundamentally, you see the same. You see like 4,500 startups competing for the budgets and attention of the same, like probably 4,500 CISOs. And so that's what makes it hard, and that's what pushes a large number of startups to say, okay, is there an underserved market outside of the enterprise? And when you look at the SME or SMB or however we call them, what you come to realize is that they represent like over or around 50% of the US market. So there is definitely, like in terms of the number of people employed, there is definitely an opportunity there. The challenges, however, are very different, because they're often not aware of the need for security. They have no budget to spend on security. They're not a sophisticated buyer, meaning they have no idea what is the fundamental difference between a company that says we offer security for SMEs and is selling a password manager plus a VPN versus a company that says we offer a security for SMEs and is selling SOC 2 compliance versus a company that is selling something else. Like they have no ability to assess, to evaluate, to compare, and to make informed decisions. So I do think that the trend where there will be more companies, more startups trying to go after the SME market, it is going to be something that we will see in the US as well, and we have already started to see it. What I do think is different is that in Europe, by definition, more companies in Europe are smaller compared to the US sizes. So I think that the European market kind of pushes people into that direction, because there are less JP Morgans of Europe. There are less Googles of Europe. So you go where the money is, you go where the market is, and it's typically like smaller companies, it's the government, and so on and so forth.
Brilliant. And we get some fun from Lorna. What do you think from your perspective, Lorna, on that subject?
I mean, it's a strange one for us, right? Because predominantly in the beginning, our customers were B2C. So the people come into career change, right? So the way that we worked with business was almost like recruitment with no to little charge. And whether they're SME or they're enterprise in the UK, they're facing the same problem of recruiting the talent that they need. Enterprise, obviously, on a bigger scale. So I think it was at the beginning, the early adopters were definitely the SMEs, because they didn't have to go through as much governance and process to change maybe how they recruited, and potentially less risk to take a chance on a career changer. So we worked with a lot of SMEs who've come back and rehired from us. But then when we sort of moved into the working more with B2B specifically, actually it was the enterprise who were the big adopters. So the pilot program we did with BT, they're putting 30 through at once. They can do that. An SME can't do that. They can't take 30 people out of another area of the business, retraining them, and then put them into security. So I think it's been mixed. It's been mixed for us, in all honesty. And the way we work with businesses has slightly changed as well, to looking at kind of reskill and deploy, which is what we do. So So I think probably a journey of starting more predominantly with SMEs to actually now looking at more of those enterprises, just because they've got the resource to be able to do what they need to do to get them people in bulk. That sounds awful when you're talking about people, doesn't it? But hopefully you know what I mean.
A box of 30 people, please. I've seen maybe on that side a little bit actually the opposite of risk avoidance of enterprise being more risk avoiding smaller startup in general versus SME, maybe because there is no enough market, maybe they're more willing to actually take the chance, maybe the risk is lower. Exception and caveat on that is having again that angel proxy trust where if you have a specific number of CISO that trust you, they tend to recommend there are more chances that other CISO might take the chance, maybe on a smaller scale, learn, grow. So I think for us was absolutely instrumental to have that because we pointed directly for enterprise because we came out from enterprise and solving a problem from enterprise. So sometimes it's also the kind of problem that you're trying to solve, it naturally fit a specific size of market. But Saj, from your perspective, what do you see and think?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a growing market opportunity, I think, looking at SMEs in the UK or servicing SME needs. And I completely agree with Ross's points earlier that, the majority of the UK economy is made up of SMEs, first of all. Over half of UK private sector turnover is generated by SMEs. But I think there's a couple of unique factors, though. So when, if you think about it as a spectrum, obviously, one side of the spectrum, you've got relatively, let's say, unsophisticated, needs or business needs from a security perspective. Maybe they don't quite understand security. But the other side of the SME spectrum, you've actually got quite a significant mid-market in the UK. So think about like areas of the UK economy that are pretty strong, like financial services, professional services, the legal sector. There's some pretty healthy mid-tier firms in those spaces that are pretty sophisticated. They have got significant investment appetite in terms of security. And actually, they're easier to deal with than going after a major multinational firm. And then coupled with that, there's a strong regulatory requirement and a standards requirement. So, from a standards perspective, we've got things in the UK such as Cyber Essentials, which is driving, a greater uplift in cyber hygiene across the SME economy. And then from a regulatory standpoint, clearly there's a number of regulated sectors in the UK, as I just mentioned, but also other adjacent regulations such as, privacy regulations, the Data Protection Act, GDPR, and also Online Safety Act as well, which are driving, some of this kind of convergence in some of the companies that we tend to work with, focusing on SMEs as an opportunity and actually partnering with a number of platforms that might be servicing large customer bases and using them as a channel to market. So one of our companies, CyberSmart, has done that with a challenger bank, for example. That challenger bank being Starling Bank, which is one of the fastest growing financial services institutions in the UK. So it can be done, and I think there is an opportunity there, which a number of entrepreneurs in our ecosystem are starting to target more and more.
Brilliant. And I want to pick maybe something that's a comment on SMB and MSSP as like an aggregator for smaller startup and service for enterprise or for SMB. As a final thought and as the final 5 minutes, what do you guys think about selling instead of individual client to MSSP or MSP or managed service provider to actually aggregate and bridge those complexity level that traditionally you have? Like I've seen a couple of solutions in cyber just specifically selling solution for MSP. Let's do quickly 2 minutes on that thoughts, and then we do a close. Alistair, your perspective.
Yeah, I think on the previous question as well, MSSP and MSP is part of the answer here, right? I mean, I think we failed a bit as an industry, I think, overall, because we fund and build too many things for what I call the 1%ers at the top of like these huge sophisticated banks that are looking at these edge cases that don't really affect everyone else. And it's very interesting and exciting. And I'm seeing it again with AI, where everyone's bothered about a lot of edge cases here and not the main meat of the issues. So yeah, it's something that I think about a lot is how you address that. What I think of as the main market in cybersecurity, and I think the challenge is that you, depending on how far down you go, right, what's the price point got to be before this is going to make sense, right? And I think if it's really low, then your cost of sale, it has to be incredibly low as well. So how do they discover your product? And the answer probably is through MSSP and MSPs. And I think so. Even at Digital Shadows, it was in the last few years before the acquisition, but we built out a pretty sizable MSSP practice ultimately, because that capability had become sort of commoditized and well known enough that MSSPs wanted it as a line item. The challenge when you're getting started is there's new categories don't tend to appear that quickly in MSSP selling to SMB, right? It tends to be more mature categories. But I think if you can find a way of doing something more efficient and better and targeted at that audience, you look at Huntress, you look at Arctic Wolf, there's a bunch of others that have done this exceptionally well. I think there's a huge opportunity there because it is so underserved as a space. But yeah, health warning about how do you keep the cost down in building.
There is a DDoS, by the way. They're taking down Facebook.
I think for us it's a different market for us because we're not selling a product per se. We're going where people need the talent and they need that research to come in and talent. So so in that respect, yeah, MSSPs need that talent as much as anybody else. So we would go at them. So I'm just filling in until Al's back.
I was all done. I was speaking fast because I knew I was going. I saw Serge go.
It's the new format as Russian roulette.
That's it. At least we're on a cycle of being booted out.
Yes. All right, Ross, before you disappear.
Yeah, I mean the way to reach SMBs is to look at the channel partners, right? It is incredibly hard to make the economics of selling individually to every single small company work. And the answer to your question is yes, absolutely. We should be looking to sell to MSSPs. The part that's hard is that, well, not necessarily hard, but something that people need to keep in mind is that selling to MSSPs means building the product which solves the problems for MSSPs and considers how they deploy the solution to their customers. So you have to be multi-tenant from day one. You have to have the way for you to sort of unify the billing among all of their customers. You have to make it easy, and that doesn't come simply by sitting around the room and saying, you know what, tomorrow let's start selling to MSSPs. You have to plan it, and you have to think about the product and have it built, have it deployed, have it serviced, and so on and so forth.
And how to sell it, because I think selling to B2B and B2C versus MSSP, I think that's a whole channel categories, nurturing, stimulating them, kind of marketing to the marketers that's going to market to the various market, making it easy. So it's extremely difficult, but could help on the part of enterprise, because large enterprise serves a lot of the characteristic of the MSSP. We found that building a go-to-market, and we purposely pushed the MSSP option at the very last because it was distracting us from the main customer profile, and would have been a shot in the dark. But I've seen as well companies that have been building just for MSSP, so that was interesting. Sarge, from your perspective, have you seen that in the UK startup scene or in the new startup scene, or maybe that's food for thought to involve MSSP in Plexer as well?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I don't really have much to add on the comments what you said. Like, I think it is, it's a key channel, but the thinking behind it, as Ross said, it's quite a significant undertaking, and it needs a very specific level of knowledge and skill, which actually sometimes we find in our space, maybe there's not really an abundance of understanding there. I mean, it's worth saying that in the UK market, in terms of all revenues generated from a cybersecurity standpoint, 74% of all revenues are generated by the 24% of the largest firms. So it's hugely, consolidated in terms of that perspective. But then 80% of the UK cyber sector actually consists of small or medium-sized businesses. So there's a long tail to the revenue. And therefore, if you really want to scale quickly, you obviously have to think about channel.
Brilliant. And unfortunately, we are at the time, and with the challenge that we had of the Russian roulette of a webinar. But I want to thank everyone for the amazing discussion talk, and all the people that we didn't manage to pick up all of the comment, unfortunately. But feel free to actually keep on posting comments, and we'll see them and we'll reply across the board. I'll insert as well the link to the book from Ross. Thank you so much for everyone. Have a great day.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
And keep on building.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.